911. What is the address of your emergency? If you're being asked this question, you're obviously not having a good day. In fact, you could be having one of the singular worst moments of your life. Having to request emergency services like medical, fire, or law enforcement is never a pleasant prospect, and I hope you rarely, if ever, have to make that call. Here's a thought for you, though. Imagine having to ask that question. Imagine it's your job, and for 12 hours at a time, you're answering 911 calls and hearing the worst moments of someone's life. Hello, my friends. I'm your host, Mortimer James, and I would like to welcome you to the world of the creepy and the caffeinated, of conspiracies and coffee. Welcome to Tales from the Dark Roast. Today is Christmas Eve, and it reminds me that many people aren't off today, tomorrow, or any other holiday. The 911 dispatcher, members of law enforcement, firefighters and paramedics, nurses and doctors, they're all considered critical personnel and don't get the time off that many of us enjoy around the holidays. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, I was a 911 dispatcher for a little over 9 years at an agency here in Tampa, Florida. It was an intense, punishing, and thankless job, but it was also rewarding, fulfilling, and I worked with some outstanding people. In the introduction, I mentioned how you end up dealing with people in the worst of times. If they're calling 911, it's usually not because they're having a good day. Sometimes you also deal with people abusing 911, calling for asinine reasons or making crank calls. It's all part of the job, and you learn to deal with each call as it comes in. Over the years, though, sprinkled in amongst the emergency, crank, and information-seeking calls, I experienced a handful of odd calls. From callers that couldn't quite put to words what they were dealing with, who didn't want to sound crazy and were using cautious words when describing their situation. Callers who were dealing with the strange and unusual. Callers dealing with the paranormal. It doesn't get talked about enough in the media or other outlets, but people do call 911 because of their weird encounters. In today's episode, I want to talk about 4 very specific instances I personally had when answering 911 calls. 3 of them will be calls that I took, and 1 will be a call I dispatched to our units. Originally, these were side notes or stories to be passed back and forth on break, but now I'm bringing them to you. So sit back and enjoy our second episode of One Cup Conspiracy. Strange but true 911 calls. Well, now that we're going to start the episode, we've got to drink our coffee. Since it's the holidays, I'm going to do something a little different, and I picked up a Manhattan Special, which is espresso, but it's also a premium coffee soda. So let's pop this open. Uh-oh. Fizzy. Man, that just tastes like coffee with like a little bit of a soda background. So instead of it being a mug for today's episode, that's our timer. We've got this Manhattan Special, which I picked up from a little Italian bistro coffee place. In fact, it was the place that I took Drusilla Nix for the first 2 episodes. But let's get on to today's One Cup Conspiracy. The first 2 calls I'm going to talk about are related and they're the same topic, but they occurred different days, and the reason they occurred was also a different story. So first, I want to talk about 2 calls I took about UFOs. And actually, 1 I took, 1 I dispatched. So the first one I took, I remember, it was fairly early. I want to say I'd been there about 4 or 5 years. I was working a night shift. And it was a slower evening. I remember that. And the person who called didn't know how to describe what they were seeing, but they said that they were seeing like streaks of shooting light coming over their neighborhood. And they were really confused by it because they didn't know what it was. If you're an astronomy buff, you might be guessing what it is, but I'm going to tell the story and then we'll get to that. So I took the call and I listened to them, and they, I think they called on 911 because we also answered non-emergency calls. And as they were talking, they didn't want to say UFO, but they kept saying maybe a plane, but they didn't think it looked like a plane, but they were seeing a lot of them. And they kept going. So I took an information call because they couldn't really describe it other than streaks of light. But as I'm sitting there, I could hear behind me another dispatcher taking a call, and they're using the same sort of words and terms that I was using and that I was getting from my caller. Streaks of light over their neighborhood, bright in the sky, not a plane. And so I went not ready real quick, and I rolled my chair back, and I was like, hey, is your caller describing like a UFO? And the other dispatcher's like, yeah. And then I hear from across the room someone else saying the same thing. So we had received a flurry of calls about people seeing UFOs streaking through the sky. And a lot of them didn't want to use those terms, UFOs, because they didn't want to sound crazy, but a couple of them did. And as we're sitting there figuring it out, I'm like, wait a second. It's nighttime and it's Florida, and I don't remember exactly what time of year it was, but there are a number of meteor showers that occur throughout the year in Florida. So I went real quick, pulled up Google, did a quick search, and sure enough, we were in the middle of a meteor shower. And they usually last for anywhere between like 3 or 4 days or even up to a week. But there's usually a peak point where they're really strong. And apparently it was very clear that night. And so what people were seeing and calling in on 911 and non-emergency about was a meteor shower. But they thought they were UFOs. That one was really fun because I'm thinking, oh man, this is my first UFO call. Like, yeah. So, and of course it turned out to be meteors. And if you've ever seen a meteor, they can light up the sky, especially a decent sized one. You will see a trail of light. Sorry, my dog decided to snore. Man, that Manhattan is good. All right, so my second UFO story. I did not take this call, but I was working our radio, so I was actually dispatching our units out. And this time, they put in a call. So the call taker took the call, and the caller described seeing a large ball of light hanging over their neighborhood. He said it wasn't a plane, it wasn't moving, but it did not look like a star. He said it was brighter than a star, and it was glowing. And he was very concerned. The dispatcher, I remember putting notes in there, caller's very upset, freaking out a little bit, that sort of thing. And so I dispatched to our units because it was in my zone that I was working. And so I came up on the radio, and there was actually a couple of units that were nearby that weren't on calls. And so I voiced the call to them, and you can kind of hear the humor in their voice as they accepted the call and they went out there. And they switched to a secondary channel. And so I heard them talking on the secondary channel, and we turned it up and we asked them, hey, are you guys seeing this light? And sure enough, they were seeing the light exactly as this guy described it. A huge glowing ball of light. Except they're like, I don't think this is a UFO. And I'm like, okay. I didn't think it was a UFO either, but I was hoping. I was hoping maybe we got a real call. And what the deputies ended up doing is they actually had a scope from one of their rifles, and they took the scope out and they pointed up, and they actually were able to determine that what the caller was seeing was not a UFO, was not a plane, wasn't even a satellite. What they were actually seeing was a planet. And I don't remember which one it was, maybe Saturn, but with the scope that they were using, they were actually able to get a very good view of it. And both the units that were out there said, this is a very bright object in the sky, but it's not a UFO. It's a planet. And they could see it clearly in their scope. And I remember being really disappointed that it wasn't a UFO. But for that 5 or 10 minutes in between getting the call and putting them on it and then speaking with them, we were very excited that, hey man, we got a UFO. That's it. We got a UFO. We got a call. Boom. But of course, it was a planet. So unfortunately, both my UFO calls that I dealt with were not astrological, sorry, astronomical. They were related to things within the heavens, meteors, and a planet. So the second, well, I guess the second type of story. And that's good. That is really good. Highly suggest you guys pick up some Manhattan Special if you haven't. Haven't ever tried it. It's good. So the second one that I want to talk about is I actually took a call about a Bigfoot, or I guess here in Florida we would call him a swamp ape. But I don't know how familiar you guys are with Tampa and Central Florida in general, but there are actually at least 3 different species of monkeys that are loose within the woods. There are macaws, or rhesus macaws, which we have here in Tampa. Squirrel monkeys, something called a green monkey. I don't know. Most of them are pretty small. The macaws can be pretty decently big. They're the ones you see a lot of videos of, like in Japan, I believe, where they're in the hot springs and they've got like the old man face and they're wet. So we deal with a lot of these monkey calls. In fact, it was kind of all over the news many years ago where there was a monkey in one of like the nicer upper scale neighborhoods that was causing mischief, and they were able to catch it on camera and all this other stuff. But the call I took, I remember specifically, was near the Hillsborough River State Park. And the caller was calling because she was hearing something in the woods that backed up against her house. And when she went to go and figure out what the noises were, she said that she saw something that reminded her of a monkey, but it was entirely too big. She said that, if I remember correctly, she said that it was like at least 6 or 7 feet tall, at least as far as she could tell, because it was near the fence, but it was taller than the fence. So she just had a chain link fence, not a privacy fence. So chain link. So this sit 3.5, 4 feet up off the ground, and she said it was taller than the fence from what she could see, and it had brown fur, and it was just kind of back in the trees a little bit of ways, and it was scaring the ever living crap out of this woman on the phone. I'm talking to her and I'm trying to keep her calm. I'm like, okay, ma'am, just, calm down, take a breath. You're inside. Whatever's out there is out there. It's not making aggressive, motions or anything or coming towards you. And she said, no, it's just, I can see it on the wood line. And again, I was working evening, so it was pitch black out. It was night. And so I put a call in. I put it in as like an animal call because, I don't know of any agency that has UFO, Bigfoot, or ghost calls, but so I just put it in as an animal call. And I'm on the phone with her, and before our units can arrive and get on scene, she said that it just vanished back into the woods. She said, it's gone. I don't see it anymore. It's like it stepped back and it's gone in the woods. And the noises stopped, and our units got there, and they did not see anything. They didn't find anything, no footprints, no trace, no nothing. But this woman was adamant that what she saw was not a monkey, but it reminded her of one. And to me, that sounds a lot like what people describe when they talk about Bigfoots, or, like I said, in Florida, we call them the swamp ape. And there have actually been reports of swamp apes in Hillsborough River State Park. In fact, if you Google it, there's a fairly decent video of what someone thinks they caught might have been a swamp ape in the state park from a few years ago. I think they were in a kayak and they were paddling and they were filming the shore, and you can see in the reeds and the grass along the water and on the shoreline, there's a tall brown something that ended up kind of moving and walking off through the water and disappearing. So there is a history for these things to be spotted in that area and from where that caller was. So did she see a swamp ape? Did she see a Bigfoot? Or did she see one of these three, possibly even more, invasive species that have been let loose in the woods of Florida? There's another really famous picture floating around of a Bigfoot or something in and near some palm fronds. And every time I see that picture, I can only think that it looks like an orangutan or another large primate ape. So maybe there's a couple of those loose in Hillsborough River State Park, and that's what she saw. I don't know, but this woman was absolutely terrified of what she was seeing along the back line of her yard. So that's my second type of story. So I've had two UFO calls, one Bigfoot call, and the one that stuck with me the most I saved for last because it's probably my favorite because of, well, just what happened and the way this woman handled it. I gotta give her kudos for that, but it's definitely one that when I was taking the call, I remember getting goosebumps, and I'm sitting here right now drinking this coffee in the middle of the day on Christmas Eve, and I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. We are getting close to the end of that Manhattan special. So, let's see. Again, I was working evenings because the majority of my time when I was a 911 dispatcher, call taker, I worked evenings. So we worked 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. basically, and 12-hour shifts. I remember it was probably about mid-shift, so a little after midnight, and I answered a 911 call. So, 911, what is the address of your emergency? And this woman came on the line, and she didn't say, I have someone in my house. But she came on the line, and she goes, there's something in my house. I was like, okay, ma'am, did you have an animal loose in your house? What's going on? She goes, no, I hear footsteps in my house on my steps and coming down my hallway. She's like, I've locked my children and myself in my bedroom, and I can hear something moving outside. I was, okay, ma'am, well, stay on the line with me. I got her address, got the pertinent information. I got the call on the system. I put it in as a burglary in progress because I'm assuming that she maybe just woke up and she's hearing someone that's broken into her home. And I said, okay, ma'am, can you describe, did you see anyone? Did you see anything? She said, no, I haven't seen anybody. She goes, in fact, and this is what I have to commend her on, because a lot of people, when they get scared, they refuse to interact with their fear. So if they think someone's in their home, they're going to refuse to open the door and look and see if they see anyone. And I can't blame them. You've got to keep your person, your family safe. But this woman took the risk of opening the door, and she told me, she's like, no, I've looked outside. I don't see anyone in the hallway, but I still hear footsteps. And it was at this point where she stopped saying, I'm hearing something. Oh, goosebumps. She stopped saying, I'm hearing something, to going, I have a ghost in my house. And she said it. I was thinking it, but she said it. I have a ghost in my house. She was calm, but she was terrified. She was able to stay calm, I think, because of her children. She didn't want to scare them, but she was not in a good way. So I stayed with her on the phone. Any sort of in-progress call like that, it was our agency's policy to stay on the phone with the caller for as long as they felt safe and you felt like you could do some good for them. So I'm staying on the phone with her, and I'm talking to her. Okay, ma'am, just stay calm. Let me know if anything changes. Let me know if you hear anything else. Let me know if you see anything. So the entire time, our deputies are on their way. They're coming emergency, lights and sirens. And I'm telling her, okay, just stay with me on the phone. They're almost there. I'm looking at them out on the map. I'm seeing their GPS locations. Like, ma'am, they're just a few blocks from your home. They're pulling into your neighborhood now. They'll be there in moments. She goes, okay, I'm still hearing footsteps. She's like, I hear them. They're right outside the door, and they're walking in the hallway. She said, I'm not seeing any shadows under the door. I'm not seeing any movement. I'm not hearing anything else, but I'm hearing these footsteps. And so I sat on the phone with her for close to 10 minutes. And the whole time she's saying, I have a ghost. This is a ghost. I can hear her kids in the background. They weren't crying, but they were definitely agitated. And so, I have a ghost. Okay, ma'am, just stay with me on the line. Deputies are there. They're going to help you get it sorted out. Of course, internally, I'm thinking, if there's a ghost, there's nothing these deputies are going to do. They've got nothing. They've got nothing to deal with a ghost. Like, unless one of them happens to be like some sort of ordained priest and he just happens to carry, holy water, a Bible, and a cross, Nomine Patri, Filii, Spiritus Sancti, I don't know. All right. So, but I'm not saying this to her because I don't want to agitate her or make the situation any worse. So finally the deputies get there and they're telling me, I'm getting messages, hey, let the complainant know, step out, the deputy's there. I said, ma'am, the deputies are at your front door, but they can't get in. Do you feel safe opening the door? She goes, I'm going to have to. I was like, okay, have you heard any steps? She goes, no, I haven't heard any steps in the last few moments. I don't hear anything right now. Stay with me on the phone. I'm going to run downstairs and open the door. So sure enough, and she tells her kids, I hear in the background, kids, stay here, close the door. So she opens the door. I'm on the phone with her. She opens it. I hear her close it heavily behind her. And then I hear she's hauling ass down the stairs of her house. I hear her hit the front door. Locks unlock. And she swings the door open. And I hear, ma'am, are you okay? As one of our deputies, make contact with her. And, she's thinking, she's got the deputy there. She's safe. So she doesn't even say goodbye to me, which is fine. I don't need a goodbye. But so she hangs up the phone. So that's where my interaction with her ended. I kept that call number up for the rest of the evening to check on it. And, the deputies immediately went upstairs. They secured her children and got them out, got her outside, and they checked the house. Nothing at all. Everything was locked. All the windows were closed. There was no sign of forced entry. There was no sign of unforced entry. Everything was exactly as it should have been when she went to bed. Whatever she was hearing, though, was substantial enough to scare her and her children enough that she called 911. She was in fear of her life. And never once did she say, someone is in my house. She used something, and then she said ghost. I'm just, yeah. That one, to me, is the one that really will stay in my mind until the day I die. Because this woman was terrified. But she was calm enough to tell me what was going on, to describe the footsteps. And she said they were footsteps. She didn't say noises. I'm hearing weird noises. We get those calls all the time. She's saying, I'm hearing footsteps. And they came upstairs and they're walking down, up and down my hallway. Those aren't pipes. That's not an open window rattling. That's not a pet. If I remember correctly, I think I asked her, do you have pets? Is that what you'd be hearing? And she said no. There was no one else in the home except for her and her kids. I think her husband was either working or off doing something else. But, there was nothing in the house that could have been causing these footsteps that came up a staircase and was walking in a hallway. All right. Well, bottle's empty, guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed these stories. I try to get some more stories from other dispatchers because I still work at the same agency, just in a different department now. And I reached out to some of the dispatchers that I'm still friendly with. And some of them had stories, but unfortunately they either couldn't get them to me or they were just very short or they didn't want to talk about them really. Because 911 call taking and dispatching is a very stressful job. I know. I did it for 9 years. And at the end of my term there, I was a wreck. It was very stressful. I gained a lot of weight. I got on blood pressure medicine. it was really rough for me. My mental health suffered greatly because of answering those calls. And that's the job, and I get it, but at the same time, wish more had been done. So, but that's another story, and it doesn't relate to our our paranormal, creepy, fun stories that we're telling here for you today. But just keep that in mind, guys. Enjoy your holiday. Enjoy your Christmas, Christmas Eve, your Christmas, your New Year's. But remember, there are people out there that are working. They're working tonight. They're sacrificing their time with their family, with their loved ones, their friends, to go out there and provide a service for people, whether they appreciate it or not. So to all my emergency services workers out there, 911 operators, police, fire, ambulance, nurse and doctors, everyone else that's working this holiday, thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate what you do. I love you for what you do, the sacrifices you're making. So if you guys are listening and you have a story that you've done while you were out working, whether it be dispatch, 911, police, fire, anything, if you have a story, reach out to me. I'd love to tell it or even have you on the show and come and talk about it. So I want to thank you all for listening and remind you to check us out on all our platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Instagram. Just search for Tales from the Dark Roast. And please leave me a comment or a review. Let me know if you've had any personal experience. And it also helps us to grow the show and get the Dark Roast out to more people. Make sure you tune in next week as I'll be doing an end of the year wrap episode and telling some of my own stories. It will be the last episode of our first season and will be a creepy, fun, good time. So once again, thank you for listening. And if you have a dark story you're willing to tell, then I have a pot of dark coffee I'm willing to share. I'm Mortimer James, and this has been a One Cup Conspiracy.